Today I'm talking to filmmaker Mikhail Gershteyn about his recent trip to Ukraine. Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I hope throughout our conversation we'll learn a bit about your rich professional background. Your documentary work received attention and awards. You put a light on socially important themes. But today I would like to jump straight to our topic, Ukraine. What is your personal connection with Ukraine?
I was born in the Soviet Union in a Jewish family of the military officer in what is now Ukraine.
We could have many stories just based on that.
The Ukraine is my motherland. My ties are there. My father's family from Kiev. My mother's family is from Zhytomyr region. My best friends live all over Ukraine, including Odessa and dear to my heart, Odessa and Mykolaiv.
How do you remember Ukraine before the war?
I visited Ukraine in 2021. The purpose was to work or reestablish my work on a Holocaust documentary, the one I've been working on for like 20 years or so, documented by Holocaust survivors from former Soviet Union. So I visited Ukraine pretty much right before the war. And we mentioned Mykolaiv and Odessa, but the Kiev itself is just beautiful city, beautiful European city, and historical too. If it wouldn't be for Kiev, we wouldn't have Russia. The beginning of the culture was started in Kiev. Historically, and being a historian, I love everything which breathes history at you. Even Lviv, where I wasn't been for like a long time, like this time when I visit, we were at the railroad station, waited for the car to pick us up. But that hour of sunrise and atmosphere, okay, we are in Ukraine. That brings a lot of memories. And after my last visit, I love Khmelnytsky and Vinnytsia. And if I want to mention Khmelnytsky, my friend Alec, who was my host in Khmelnytsky, he would probably hate me right now.
So you have a lot of friends there. Do you have some family members as well that you're in touch with?
My wife's family, they live in a small village in the Mykolaiv region. When I visited first time and right before the war, I went there by myself. So it was my first time actually meeting my wife's family. And they're native Ukrainians, the ethnic Ukrainians, as many of my friends in Ukraine. And I've never felt that, or I'm Jewish and they're Ukrainians. It felt like we either friends or family with the family, a long conversation about this denazification and demilitarization, and Nazis crawling all over Ukraine. Russians are stating. To make it short, that's not true.
I grew up knowing that Ukrainian people famous for their hospitality, friendliness.
That's true.
Yes.
You never leave hungry.
Beautiful culture, beautiful nation. Being so in touch and so connected to Ukraine, even for me, February 24, 2022, turned into stages of shock, just to acknowledge the reality of it. Was it similar for you or different based on the facts that you had at the time being more connected with the country?
So I've learned it when my friend, who's a screenwriter, wrote me a message on Messenger on Facebook. Russia attacked us while kids were sleeping. Please tell the world. Being a filmmaker, working for many, many years in television and movies, and knowing that she's a screenwriter, I thought she's writing a new script.
So totally didn't process the realities.
No.
Automatically went into that.
In my mind, I was going back into 9/11 here, when that day I drove from college and I've heard the news report on the radio, and I thought it's a bad joke. That day I wrote to her asking what she's writing, and I didn't get any response. So after minutes of waiting and realizing something maybe happened, and browsing the Google, and Google not saying anything, I start calling everybody to Ukraine, and I didn't get any responses. Only hours later, the BBC reported and CNN that the invasion, the full-scale invasion started.
We are so used to and take for granted our peaceful, comfortable life that when something like this happens, the mind, the mentality is really not quite open to understand that that's a reality. It has to go through a number of shocks just to accept that it is real. It's not a movie. It's not science fiction.
You learn pretty fast, I'll tell you. When we traveled from the United States to Poland first, and then took an overnight bus to Ukraine. It took about 12 hours, I think, of driving. When you drive through cities or places with destroyed, for example, gas station or the checkpoint and a road, and it hits you right away. This is the country at war. This is real. When I first heard the airstrike alarm, I was so alerted without knowing what to do. And we are at my friend's apartment on the 6th floor. And I'm at a balcony smoking and hearing this all over the city, loud. And then the sounds of those drones flying, you like, okay, what's next? Are we running? Are we going downstairs? Where are we gonna hide? At some point, my friend knocked at the window of his bedroom and said, Misha, go to bed. We're good. But that night, you start thinking about the real reality of the war, right? You're taking it more serious. This is a danger. Like this is a life-threatening situation every day. And you realize, wait a minute, it might be not electricity here. So I need to make sure that my phone charged, and I have at least 1 or 2 power banks with me, also charged. And then you learn to choose what is more important in your life. If you need to run, you can pack only 1 backpack. That's it.
Necessities, emergency
And then
backpack.
and you pick the backpack, and instead of putting, for example, the tripod here, you leave the 2 pockets so you can have 2 bottles of water here. And then you choose what is more important. These are decisions that people make in Ukraine every day.
What is it like to live in that kind of a stressful fight or flight response over a long time? How do people get adjusted to that?
I cannot explain even today, after meeting so many people, volunteers, people who ran from the war zones. Like I've seen the little girl who not smiling. They ran from Kherson, and they were shot at by Russians. I met them in Odessa at the drum factory, which I helped with my fundraisings too. She sits behind this drum set, start playing, and she's smiling, and her face is sparkle. And I spoke with parents, and then they tell that this is every day her comfort zone, and she smiles and she's happy. This is something we cannot digest here in America. You need to live through that. Volunteers, and for example, in Khmelnytsky, I met many great people. First of all, a friend of mine who was my host, meeting one of the biggest volunteer organizations, which organized everything from making the nets, camouflage nets, to bulletproof vests. They have like a whole territory where they collect food that they send to the army. They took me everywhere for their whole operation. In the school, there is a mother whose son is brilliant IT guy. He's a high school student. He's a handicap in a wheelchair. She would bring him to school, and while he's in class, she goes and volunteers. And that's not just one person. There are many people like that trying to do something to help the country. These small things like that somehow make you proud. I am a part of Ukraine, even though I haven't been there for 20 plus years, but Ukraine's still inside of me, no matter what. You see my friends from university fighting at the front lines, the same age as me. And when I wanted to go and fight with them, one of them told me, "We don't need you here. Everyone has to do their own job. You are filmmaker, film it.
Mhm.
Tell the story. Tell the world the truth."
That is correct, and everybody has a purpose in where they at, and somebody has to be here to tell that story, to keep it alive.
It's hard and hurts to read the news.
Right, you've been there, so for you, when you read something, it's not words on paper. That's
No.
actually experiences that you instantly related to, and you have memories and you have senses that make it real right away. And that's the difference between people who can just read and people who've been there and actually can communicate on Ukraine behalf. I would assume that in a war zone, the networks, the communication networks are quite disrupted on a regular basis. What was the situation with the power, electricity, and did you have major disruptions that lasted a long time?
We did. I mentioned the Mykolaiv, the city which was without drinking water since what, March or April of 2022, and it was pretty disturbing knowing that you cannot drink the water, which is like pouring.
Mhm.
Can you live without drinking water? Yes. You can collect it in jars, and you have, like my friends, a whole balcony filled with all jars of drinking water. And even as my friend's wife explained, these are for drinking, these are for toilet, these are for dishwashing.
Mhm.
Mykolaiv happened to be the key to Odessa by the land,
Mhm.
and Mykolaiv stood against the elite forces of Russia
Mhm.
and didn't let them go through, forced them to go around where they got beaten and pushed back too. My brother-in-law was fighting at Mykolaiv, the beginning of the war, and he showed me the battlefield. Odessa, for example, being thankful to Mykolaiv for protecting the city. Many other cities would send the trucks full of water, where people would come with all these big jars and fill it up. People adjust to live in full clothes and ready to jump and run. I had to. Doing your everyday routines will keep your mind sharp, keep you moving. When I arrived to Odessa, there were no electricity. The lights were given at a certain hours. You have to adjust to that. No lights. Generator can work only for a certain time. You need to save the generator because you don't know, will you be able to fill it with a gas next time. You calculate. My friend and Pavel and in Odessa, he calculated how much that generator eat gas. I mentioned the funny story about how we started it. It took us 7 attempts for two smart Jewish people to start the Chinese generator. We were very happy when the lights were up and was worth celebrating, and had a hot tea before going to bed. When I was in Ukraine, every city started building the points of unbreakables, what they called. There were either tents or places where there was always the generators, always the internet, chargers. So people would come and charge their phones, power banks, bring kids, have coffee, tea,
So
light
you
food.
mean every city would have some kind of a safe haven to
Yes,
come for
you
any
can call it
basic
safe haven. Yeah, it started when there's massive airstrikes were escalating. The experts say they cannot even the rockets they use, that X-55 or 101, they're pretty bad, they're damaging. They can ruin the whole house if they hit it. Or not just one house, they can ruin probably a couple around. Just one rocket can make a lot of damage. These sanctions are working.
Oh, they
And,
are, because many people are questioning that.
and I think the Russia cannot produce those rockets anymore in the speed and pace of how they could have done it before. So they ran out of the majority of what they had, but to produce the new gets harder and harder. In addition, the latest mobilization
Yeah.
took men out of workplaces. Those valuable hands in Russia who could produce those weapons, now they die in Ukrainian soil. The resources and the sources are winding down as well. Sanctions are working. Russia was pretty rich country with lots of resources before this invasion, this war started. But I'm talking about resources.
Resources,
Yes, I've seen all these videos of
all wasted, unfortunately. Yes.
how people live and all this.
Yes.
But
Well,
but Russia was always like that. I lived in Russia when I was growing up.
yes.
There is Moscow, St. Petersburg, beautiful and shiny cities. You live sometimes outside of Moscow. You can find I want to swear.
Yes, but people don't have basic necessities, even like bathrooms, let's say, right? So
yes,
yes, it's a rich country, hugely mismanaged historically and taking advantage by a small group of people usually, and it seems to be stuck in that pattern. What is your prediction, the main source of survival for people and staying on top of the daily stresses that they dealing with?
Well, the main source of survival is a will of the people. A will of the
Moral
people.
strengths, yeah.
It's something which is probably in Ukrainian DNA. You cannot defeat the freeborn people. The only time when Ukrainians were slaves, it was during Soviet Union. You cannot take from person the will of survival, the will of fighting for your own country. But these people stopped the elite forces of Russians, showing the whole world that the Russian army no more. It's not the second best army in the world.
Misha, you know, that is interesting because as I am listening to you, it's kind of like a flashback to my childhood, listening stories about the World War II and how the whole Soviet Union raised up to beat the Nazis. I can't get used to the idea how quickly the scenario changed and everybody did what they could, and the will of survival and the spirit was so strong. And in a small generation time, it totally shifted.
Yeah.
And people who are raised on those stories are now the attackers. And I'm still, I cannot comprehend what happened to the country.
Well, the propaganda happened. I had a discussion with a friend of mine who is like, she is a writer and screenwriter. One of her specialties is actually learning propaganda, Russian propaganda. She was trained in St. Petersburg, actually, back in the Soviet times. Comparing the Nazis propaganda with the Russian propaganda of 21st century, right? I would say the Goebbels is just relaxing comparing to the Russian propaganda and the means and the sizes of lies spewing out of their mouths every day. All this turning around things, flipping upside down. But this is the masterfully done, and the world let it happen. Everyone, Bush Jr. let it happen. Obama, he did. Russia could have been stopped.
Looking back at it, you know, it is, I think everybody just underestimated the reality and the intention of evil, and that it's possible in our times. As you were saying, free people versus people with slavery history, and Russian people, of course, are very much trained to have a very passive role. The national mentality character is definitely an element, big element, where propaganda is useful and not.
As I said, it's in DNA.
Yeah.
And the slavery is in Russian DNA. That goes generation back towards the Mongol Tatar.
Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
Of course,
That's how Russia was established. While the Kievan Rus was growing, the Moscow was a swamp.
Russia, yes, name of Russia came much later. Before that, it was Kievan Rus. So yeah, that just speaks for itself.
Peter the Great made himself the emperor of Russia, and I mean, historically, it's now well known that he stole the flag. There were no flag. He stole the flag from one of the shipbuilders. Same colors, just different order. I keep calling once in a while. I keep calling Russian the barbarians or zombies now because of the effect of the propaganda. And I had a very heated conversation with my former classmates from the Irkutsk University in 1984. And those were all good and nice people. And we would kept conversations for the years. And then all of a sudden, when I tried to tell them that Russia attacked Ukraine, they start shaming me. But first of all, it's not true. And second, Misha, you are Jewish and Ukrainians are killing Jews because they're Nazis, all of them. If you have this gene of suppressing your free will, no matter how smart you are a slave. At
least at the end of Soviet Union times, Russian culture was famous for intellectuality and all kinds of great cultural creative achievements. Now the reality shows that unfortunately outside of those intellectual cities, the huge enormous 11 time zones Russian masses are slave minded.
Swamp and dumpster.
Here in America, there's a lot of it's a big conversation about slavery history, but it's not really known that slavery in Russia continued much longer.
Yeah.
So, and that is our history that nobody talks about. There are so many elements that played into the current situation. A lot of truth came out about a state of affairs, just like COVID brought up lots of real issues here in the US. There are a lot of things on the surface now that we weren't aware of. Misha, I have a question to you though. So America's been a home for you for a while now.
Almost 25 years.
Yeah, that's a quarter of a century. Congratulations. Yeah. It is your home. This is your life. What motivated you to go to Ukraine in wartime? It's quite a life-size commitment to leave your life that you had established, your family, and go into a war zone when, as we know, there are no guarantees of safety and safe return. So what was the motivation for you to go there?
There is no guarantee. That's right. Because actually on the press card, it says one of the points on the press card when I received it from Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, it says that the Ministry of Defense is not responsible for your life. I'm a filmmaker. I'm working on television and I've been doing it for like over 30 years right now. I consider filmmakers sort of relatively close to journalists.
You're a documentary filmmaker.
Yeah, and yes, to tell the story from watching news and even interviewing people, right? And I've interviewed some even before going to Ukraine. That's one thing. But to go there and see it with your own eyes and feel it, that's different. I realized the risks. Maybe not fully until I stepped on Ukrainian soil and lived through my first airstrike alarm and stuff like that. But this is something I will need to bring the perspective from inside.
It was a documentary, the purpose of your trip. It wasn't like
Yes,
you had to go for any other.
No, I made a choice to go because the film for now has a working title War in Ukraine, the view from us, but it's US. I realized that I need a view from inside. Later on, I'm planning to combine both and make bigger documentary from two perspectives. Me, beginning of the war, start writing, and Facebook only doing interviews, compare, kind of like do the mirror comparison of what we Americans live through and what Ukrainians live through.
How do you feel information about the Ukrainian war being broadcasted here by the American media? Is it sufficient, fair? What is your general opinion?
I don't want to sound unethical to my colleagues in media. My work in television at local PBS station is mainly behind the scenes, the more technical. Although I worked in the news for a short period of time, and the news in general, everywhere, they're vultures, they're sharks, they go for the blood. And at the same time, they're pretty quick on making assumptions, you know, like New York Times, for example, or other like Washington Post. They trying in a competition to jump the hoops and predict first. Oh, I'm New York Times, and I predicted first that Ukraine gonna counterattack tomorrow. I want to remind how news covered the war at the beginning. Very carefully, Kyiv will fall in 3 days. Ukraine will fall to Russia. Ukraine no more. And the way the news was covering affected how politicians were acting. Like it's today Biden saying on TV and everywhere, Ukraine will win, Ukraine is strong. The coverage was going from very intense every day, every hour, to very carefully figure it out what's going on. From being the top news going to the 2 and 3 news in a row. BBC World News covering war in Ukraine for all 26 minutes to 5-6 minute stories. That's the structure of the news. You cannot be mad at them. Even though people used to call me mad Russian, I'm never mad. You need to try to put yourself in their own shoes. There are many other stories that needs to be covered in the world and locally. We cannot forget about like economic growth. We cannot forget about politics and fights between Republicans and Democrats. We cannot forget about racial issues. We cannot forget about issues with protective rights of women. It's understandable. At the same time, most of the local news not really covering the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, that affects help coming to Ukraine from people like you and me. I've done fundraisings myself. I've learned it's very hard to do. We raise money, which were very needed. I managed to buy power banks for territorial defense, where my brother-in-law and son-in-law serving, helping that music school. For them to buy that extra drum set was open extra class. They're not charging people. They're not charging kids. If the news would cover it more, the people would help more. For example, I keep on my Facebook account banner Help Ukraine. And every once in a while, I post that cup of coffee challenge to give up a cost of a cup of your coffee, morning, evening, whatever, afternoon, donate. The media not covering brings the questions from some people who would approach me and asking, but the war in Ukraine is over, right?
Oh, wow, those people are really
So
not
these people probably don't watch the national news and don't get information from the internet. Overall, I'm not really satisfied with the coverage.
Yeah.
In Poland, for example, they talk about the war in Ukraine on the news all the time. is closer to Ukraine.
Right, they are on the
Ukraine,
border, of course.
Ukraine is a shield for Poland right now,
Mhm.
as for all Europe. I think Americans being spoiled in terms of the environment they live in and how far the war is,
The distance is,
and
yes.
they forgetting one simple thing: if Russia will be done with Ukraine, they're not gonna stop.
Yeah,
They
just
will
like,
go to Europe, to America,
yes,
and
just like the world was quiet about what happened in Crimea,
yep.
and that gave the power for what's happening now. Yes, I agree with you. Unfortunately, that is the nature of news, but it's also the fast pace of life, and every day brings something. But yeah, in the news, they go for the shock and the ratings, first of all. People get adjusted even to the worst news. They want to constantly diverge attention to something. What today is the catastrophe in the world. I think it is up to us, you as a documentary maker. That's why your role is here, to keep that message alive. We need more people like you at the distance to keep resources coming, keep it as a viable topic. Unfortunately, in spite of sophistication of human race in this time in history, the wars continue somewhere in the world all the time. So here at home, America has a lot of issues, as you mentioned, to deal with right now, especially in post-COVID time. What is your message? Why should an average American allocate the time, the attention, the resources to Ukrainian war? Many wonder.
We separated by ocean, but we are not anymore. Not in the 21st century, not in the century of technology, where every news right here, right here. Understand one simple thing: Ukraine is fighting not just for the day of freedom, which should be related to America that fought for the freedom. Ukraine is fighting for everyone's freedom, for European freedom, for American freedom. Ukraine, as of today, is a shield for the whole democracy. And if the Ukraine fails, the democracy fails. People can say about Ukraine and Ukrainian politics and economy and stuff like that, and the corruption. Yes, yes, and yes. But you cannot build a democracy without making mistakes. It's easier to have a Tsar for 22 years and call it democracy. If Ukraine wouldn't be building democracy for all these last 30 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union, I'm not sure that all Ukrainians would stood up. And again, as I've been saying, a little. The volunteer organizations I met work day and night, and they go to 3 war zones, risking their life, delivering to the villages something what people over there need. When we arrived to Kherson, the city was without water, electricity, and cell phone reception. People somehow found out that their media, their soldiers, there was a president of Ukraine. Square in the middle of a city was filled with the people, celebrating, hugging us. We media. I had bulletproof vest with saying press on it, but they were hugging us. They're hugging soldiers. They're hugging each other. They're smiling. Our help here brings the smiles to the faces of people in Ukraine. As I mentioned, the kid's story, the little girl, to see her smile was so satisfactory. To know that stuff I brought for the territorial defense, for example, those pretty powerful power banks with a solar battery on it. And then when my son-in-law tells me it's working, it charges. And while it charges, I can charge my phone.
So something
This,
that does not take much here means
yeah.
a lot there.
I told the story to somebody when I came from Ukraine, and for some reason I fell asleep on the couch, and when I woke up, there was a light in the room.
Mm.
I jumped and ran to my power bank to charge it.
Cultural shock.
It became such a habit during the month that it took me some time to readjust, to figure it out. I don't need to run now. I can charge my phone anytime in my car or here at work or home. But as I showed you before, the habit stays with me, and I keep carrying for what, almost many months since coming back. I still carry it with me every day.
It is very powerful description.
So I always wanted to tell people that that little you give may save life
Yes.
across the ocean. And when somebody's saying $5, what $5 can do, they can do a lot.
Misha, I
They can
couldn't
do that.
agree with you more. We are all so connected and interconnected. It's more than a global village nowadays. America is proclaimed the leader of the free world. As you said, a smile of a child there versus a smile of a child here. And we're all parents to children across the oceans, and we're all interconnected. And what's happening there will have direct result in how things go here. Let's hope that we continue working together and do what we can. You as a documentary maker, you do your work and everybody can do what they can. We'll see free Ukraine as soon as possible.
And blooming.
I absolutely have no doubt, because this is going to be the country that's will be a true symbol of fight for freedom. Let's hope we see that day very soon.
It's coming.
Yeah. Michael, thank you so much for talking to me,
Oh,
and for
thank you.
continuing this conversation. And I wish you good luck with your documentary. Maybe when you release it, we can talk again.
Anytime. I'm in Kyiv, center city, where Russian burned military equipment exhibit here. Not all, just a little, and it's pretty powerful to see it up close, what they were bringing here to Ukraine and what happened. As I've been saying in my posts, the Ukrainian nation, born free, cannot be defeated.